Welcome back to Brother Naaay.
Oh,
I
we're
don't know what
recording.
this is. I think by now it's obvious that we are interested in the fantasy fiction superheroes world. Like that's our choice of entertainment. Along with the Marvel franchise, our favourite film franchise in history is Lord of the Rings.
She says wearing a Hobbit t-shirt.
Which brings me to my next point. We're going to kind of be doing like a Lord of the Rings versus The Hobbit because you, Liz, were watching The Hobbit the other day, and you and me used to watch The Hobbit together a lot as well. So, and we always really enjoyed it, but I'm very aware that it's kind of a bit of a controversial topic amongst the Tolkien fans.
Yeah.
What Hobbits did you watch the other day? Did you watch them all, or were you watching Five Armies or something?
Last night I watched the first one. I basically went on like a kind of a loop. I decided, I'm gonna watch the first one, and then I decided to put the second one on, and then I just put the third one on, and then I mix it up. Because like at the moment I don't just sit down and watch it. I like skip to bits that I enjoy.
Yeah, well, that's when you watch something a few times. But what kind of happens, right, with these films for us is more than with anything else. Whenever we watch these films, and particularly The Hobbit, we just commentate. Like, I'd love it if I could just record a commentary by us. You know, like how directors do the commentary for films, but instead it's two unqualified idiots. So we just end up sitting there like making memes out of it and like making jokes, like Azog's darling son Bolg and his chicken nuggets. Hey, Big Daddy. Liz, briefly, can you summarise why we do that so that people know, like, context?
Yeah, so second film, Azog goes to Dol Guldur and talks with Benedict Cumberbatch, who is playing the necromancer / Sauron / Smaug. Azog's like, you promised me that they're gonna die, and Benedict leaves with death will come to all, and he goes, and this little general random guy is like, what do we do? And Azog is like, Bolg! And so Bolg comes storming up with his metal on and his metal in his head. I also think Bolg, right, is like, he is like a teenage lad.
Yeah.
Like, he's not like his dad, just with like the scars and stuff. He's like, he had to go like a full step out, like, no, I've got like this metal plate in my head because I'm like super cool teenager, man. Like, you don't got no metal plate. Azog just puts it, do you still have a craving for dwarf flesh? And we see Bolg close up go and that is when we came up with the fact that Bolg was promised he was going to go to McDonald's tonight to have some chicken nuggets.
Yep.
And Dad's just taken that away from him.
And, you know, if you promise your angsty teenage son a McDonald's and then you don't follow through, that's going to cause some problems. And therefore, that's what we think happened. We really enjoy the films. A man just walks past. And we went to watch them at the cinema together when they came out. And like I said, we revisit them.
Although, remember the first one was ruined for me because of who I saw it with. Do you remember?
Who did you see it with?
We shan't name names.
All right, we're not going to name names today, but shade has been thrown.
Shade is thrown. I went to see it with a group of lads. I was the only girl, and basically they didn't think I would like it. And I was like, come on, okay, just. And to make them all annoyed, because I knew it would annoy them, I said, oh yeah, I fell asleep during it. And they were like, what? How could you fall asleep? Oh my god! And I was literally just there like.
Whereas in reality, when Battle of the Five Armies came out, me and Liz are sat in the cinema sobbing at the ending. And we were emotionally invested, and we thought great actors. It's a great story. The Hobbit's a brilliant story. Can't deny that, especially if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings anyway. Lord of the Rings, right, is a trilogy of books. It's massive, massive books, massive, massive films.
Yeah.
However, The Hobbit is like a little book like this. And it's kind of more like aimed towards a younger audience, like more like children. When they made it into a film, that's like really exciting. But then, because Peter Jackson directed The Hobbit as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
So
like 10 years after Lord of the Rings, then
yeah.
The Hobbit. Which I respect that.
Yeah, and I'm glad that he did. I'm glad that he was in charge of it again. But I think that they just tried to sort of make it the same thing as The Lord of the Rings. So that's why it ended up being a trilogy. And every film's really long, and that they just put in loads of stuff to try and fill it out, whereas Lord of the Rings is already the epic that it was, whereas they tried to make The Hobbit into an epic when The Hobbit's not really an epic.
And in both franchises, they've got like 6 films, because you've got the 3 extended editions after that. So there are some points when I'm watching the movie, even though I enjoy them so much, there are some points where I'm just like
I think it drags out certain things that don't need to be dragged out, because they've tried to just make it like that.
Yeah.
And I felt like in some ways it was a little bit of like, as often these things go, when you try to build on a franchise, with all these like little drops and name drops and Legolas being there, like, wait. For real hardcore fans, we know too much, and then that can ruin it. And then for people who aren't already hardcore fans, it can get ruined by the fact that it's maybe just too much film.
Yeah. But
it is.
In saying all of this, if we were offered a role in it, we wouldn't turn it down.
No, of course not. You know, actors are in films because it's great for them to be in films. They're not going to sit there and go, you know what, it's really kind of you, Mr. Jackson, for offering me the lead in The Hobbit. But like, I just don't really think that this is how I would have done it. Like, no, that's not.
That doesn't be right now.
Another thing we wrote down was that we just think that it had a bit of an issue when it comes to living up to Lord of the Rings, which I said this to you before we started this, but I looked it up on Rotten Tomatoes and it has a 95% audience rating, which is...
Yeah, I just tried to find The Hobbit, but I couldn't find it.
For some reason it doesn't come up on the Google search, but you can find out if you type in The Hobbit Rotten Tomatoes.
Sorry.
What was that?
Okay, so the first Hobbit film, that got a 64% on the tomato meter.
Oh, okay. That's not great.
83% audience score. Battle of the Five Armies, I know that was the last one, but that's the next one that comes up on Google. It's like they just skipped over the second one. Desolation of Smaug got higher at 74%. Battle of the Five Armies went down to 59%.
Oh?
So, according to Rotten Tomatoes, the second one is the best, followed by the first one, followed by the last one. Question we asked, why? Why do you think this? What is your logic?
The last one is the lowest.
Yeah.
But like, I don't think that happens with Lord of the Rings, does it? Because I think that the Return of the King was amazing. It's just because that's the point where it starts to become too drawn out, like in the last film. You're like, we should be done by now.
There's battles going on and there's not...
Yeah. Because the Lord of the Rings has been such a deep storyline that the battles, but then there's like the story and the way in which it's filmed. It's got everything in it for a film.
Yeah. I also think it's probably gone down. You know, in the last spoiler, I mean, hopefully you will have all seen it by now. The last, you know, when Thorin and Azog are battling on the ice and it's cracked and Thorin picks up his big rock cube thing, chucks it to him, and he falls under the ice and he's just like under the ice and he's just floating, and I get really angry about this, and he just sees him floating and he goes, I'm gonna follow this guy.
My heart broke during that scene. I
think
it felt avoidable, right? That's what's so unsatisfying, is that when a character's demise feels avoidable.
That was different from the book. So that didn't happen in the book. In the book, Thorin, Fili, and Kili all died together, with Fili and Kili trying to protect their uncle.
So I used to actually make me weep when when Azog floats under the ice, like.
Yeah, and
I was like, for God's sake, buy your son his chicken nuggets and stop, like, just going after people because you're petty.
I think Azog is that parent who's still trying to be young and still trying to think that he's got it all.
Yeah, he definitely thinks he does.
Let himself go.
Just on the Rotten Tomatoes, like the critics' reviews for The Hobbit, some points that they make, kind of what we were saying. Like, it frequently seems as though Jackson is less interested in making The Hobbit than in remaking his own fabulously successful Lord of the Rings series. Okay. And then, there's no denying the majesty in Peter Jackson's visuals, but he's taken a relatively slim children's book and stretched it beyond the limits. So I think that's what bothered people the most, in a way.
I reckon he could have got 2 movies out of it, like 2 really good ones.
Yeah, like, that's the thing. Don't worry about remaking the franchise.
No, we wouldn't have worried about that. We were just amazed that it was coming out itself and that we were doing it.
We weren't. Yeah, that's the thing. I think that was I spoke to some people about it and they were all saying all that sort of thing. And I was like, I'm just excited. We got t-shirts.
Hopefully we'll be able to insert a picture of that, but I left mine at you.
Yeah, I think I've got a picture of us somewhere, of us wearing them in your house. So I'll try and put that in. This is something that we were talking about when we were planning this video the other day. I mean, I know it doesn't seem like we planned this, but I promise that we actually did.
We actually attempted to plan.
It's basically a male story.
Yeah.
Okay, all the main characters who are like in the crux of the narrative are men. And that's just a direct result of it being written way back when. And you brought up a good point about why you think that is.
Did I?
Yeah, about time.
Oh, the film. So I haven't seen it yet, but those people who do watch this will hopefully remember the film that came out a couple of years ago, the Tolkien film. It shows him during the war, the First World War, and that's how he got the inspiration for writing the Lord of the Rings book, because he was there in the war. He had his 4 friends, so this is like the story of like Frodo, Sam, Pippin, and Merry. That was the inspiration, I believe, even though I have not seen the Tolkien film, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but just from watching the trailer and how it pinpoints those moments, that is why it's very heavy on the male side, because, like you said, the time it was written, but also the events that he went through to then get the inspiration for the book, like the fires in No Man's Land, the bombs, representing the depths and flames of Mordor.
This is getting a bit philosophical, but like Sauron, he's basically like a faceless enemy.
Yeah, because
he's this like entity and he's an eye, but he don't often really fight Sauron. It's like he's this all-powerful being rather than like one person kind of antagonist. Yeah. And I think that might have been how the soldiers felt in the war. Like, don't you think like they must have felt like, what are we fighting here? Like,
yeah, who are we fighting? Like,
because the nature surrounding the cause of the First World War isn't, people always think of Hitler, but the First World War was pre-Hitler. So yeah. I think people tend to get like, unless you know your history and stuff, it's like seems a bit cloudy as to what happened during the First World War. I'm not gonna. You know what? I did learn about it in school, but it's been so.
I did as well. Oh,
I'm not gonna get into that unless I know the facts. I know that when you come to then make The Hobbit, and you see that it's also about male camaraderie, I can understand why they'd be like, we need to involve a female character. A bit like that was yet another thing that they add into the film. And what we were saying was, it was kind of like they had Evangeline Lilly in it as Tauriel. She's great, but then you're like, great, this like badass female elf, but then we had Liv Tyler's character in Lord of the Rings.
Arwen.
Yeah, and it kind of felt like it was just the same as her, really.
Yeah, because like Arwen had her massive kind of horseback fight with her magical powers in the first Lord of the Rings film. So we saw the strength of her, but she also represented the purity of the female.
Yeah.
And you have Kate Blanchett's character, Galadriel, the Lady of Lothlorien. We see her in The Hobbit have a moment of, like we do in Lord of the Rings. We see her magical powers. She is this.
Yeah, which I think that's all really cool. So it's not like there's no female characters to look up to in those films, but I think The Hobbit, in a way, it was naturally more lacking than Lord of the Rings, being a smaller story in general about the dwarves and the Hobbit. Apart from the mention of Thingy's wife, who he thinks is his son, in the little picture.
Who is this? Your brother?
That is my wife.
And what is this horrid creature? A goblin mutant.
That's my wee lad, Gimli.
Like, that's my wee lad, Gimli. And I know when we watched it, everyone in the cinema went, woo!
Yeah. That's another little, like, fun little nugget there for fans. But yeah, so back to the Tauriel thing. So, like, great, you're going to put a female character in there to flesh out the story. But they then made a whole love triangle. And, did we need that? Did we need it? No. You don't need to make everything that involves a woman. It doesn't have to be a romance. It doesn't have to be.
It didn't need to happen, to be honest.
She could have just become friends with them. But to be fair, if you're going to have Aidan Turner play a dwarf, it's going to be a hot dwarf.
I know, but then I'd also have to go, but come on. Thorin with his lovely, like, bits of grey and his hair and his L'Oreal advert.
Beneath my right breast. Thorin.
There we go, that guy.
Overall, none of this is a problem for us in terms of just being a fan of a film, but we thought it would be interesting to just discuss these points and talk about it. And I can see why people feel that perhaps it wasn't quite the right way of approaching making The Hobbit into a film. Talk to me about the trolls, Liz.
Just that one troll in the last film. I just feel so bad for him. He just didn't see it coming, And he dies. He has no eyes. He has no hands. And he has no feet.
That's nothing.
And he has a guy riding on his back, pulling him by his eye sockets, telling him where to go. And it's really upsetting.
Honestly, it's 2020. Can we crack down on this discrimination against trolls? Well, there we go. Anyone out there who's thinking of making any more films, TV shows in the Middle-earth universe, we're very, very available.
Yeah, bye everyone.
Bye, see you next week.
Hanonlay.
Be too excited.
Hanonlay. Hanonlay means thank you in Elvish.